Take Chernivtsi, for example, without a doubt a beautiful city. What else can I say? Additionally, women were dismembered, entrepreneurs tortured, and hundreds scammed out of millions. Something like that. And that's what we'll talk about today, so make yourselves comfortable, dear ones, because this is terrifying.
I remember it happened 5 days before her 19th birthday. She lost her temper, made a scene, and started demanding money, and she charged for every single day. But I'm not Richard Gere and she's not Julia Roberts. Remember Pretty Woman, when he hired a prostitute for a few weeks with hourly pay? I took her from a brothel from a dump. I fed her, gave her drinks, she used all the utilities for free. She should have been grateful to me to the heavens, but she turned out to be an ungrateful creature.
These were the words of Alexander Korniv, a Ukrainian serial maniac who operated in Chernivtsi. That's how, using poetic comparisons, he describes his breakup with Oksana. Korniv met this girl in unromantic circumstances, having just been released after several years in prison. So he was craving, let's say, female attention, and also cleanliness and order at home. He chose to address both issues at once, visiting the spot where prostitutes gathered. There, as he said. He says he picked up Oksana. That meeting lasted a little longer than just one night. The girl lived with Korniv for 3 months. And the key word here is lived, because after that her life ended. During an argument, Korniv grabbed a pillow and suffocated his partner. The question arose, what to do with the body. Leaving it seemed like a bad idea. Eventually, the corpse's smell would spread beyond the apartment. Then what? Bag it? Bury it? For Korniv, that sounded like a decent plan, except for one small, hairy but in his case. You see, the apartment he either owned or rented at the time to meet with prostitutes was on the 9th floor. And the elevator, as is often the case, wasn't working. Carrying the whole body downstairs without drawing attention was nearly impossible, so Mr. Korniv began cutting. Arms, legs, head. He dismembered the girl in the bathtub, cleaned up, and slowly disposed of the body parts. Kornev's second victim was also a prostitute. He hired her services after seeing her on the highway. 2 more targets were also, let's say, sex workers. Korniv always acted according to the same pattern. First, he would take the girl home, then demand that she show a certificate from the venereal disease clinic, supposedly to prove that she wasn't sick with anything. When it was clear there was no certificate, this was the early 2000s, and what certificates could highway prostitutes have, Korniv would kill them as his guests. And then he would dismember them, quote,
I was cleansing the world of diseased prostitutes. I'm a cleaner.
He buried the dismembered bodies, and among other places, in the yard of his private house. And in the spring of 2004, the family of Zahurskyi came across a rather peculiar find. The family bought a house on the outskirts of Chernivtsi and set it up just how they liked. One of their plans was to get rid of the old shed, which was about to collapse, and build a brick utility room in its place. Mr. Zahurskyi, the newly minted property owner, first threw out all the junk from the rotten building. He then planned to address the foundation. The man took a sturdy shovel, stuck it into the ground, and pressed down sharply with his foot. The blade of the shovel got stuck. And then, Belevsky himself got stuck, or rather, froze, out of fear. The man just stood there, not moving, staring at one spot. You see, he had uncovered a rib cage that was still covered with remnants of skin. Within a few seconds, Belevsky was already running to the neighbors who had a phone, so he could call the police from there. Back then, the police arrived quickly. After all, you don't get calls like that every day. Forensic experts also arrived at the scene. They dug up the ground even more and took the rest of the bones. It took several weeks to get the results of the detailed examinations. However, the specialists immediately stated without a doubt these were definitely human remains, and they were buried just a few months ago, but that's not the end. The institution's representatives, who hadn't left as required by law, continued visiting homes for a long time. All because, while looking for more remains of the first body fragment, they also found the rest of the second. Then later, the third and fourth, the case was becoming more and more extensive and depressing. The police already had a suspicion at that time. The remains probably belonged to missing sex workers. The thing is, about a month earlier, the criminal investigation officers had received information from their own sources that a maniac had appeared in Chernivtsi who was specifically hunting prostitutes. He had been operating for more than a year, but for a long time, no one knew anything about him. Let's just say it was because of the specific nature of the missing women's work. Relatives often didn't know at all what they were doing or where they lived. That's why they simply couldn't provide any specific reliable information to law enforcement. Some loved ones were too ashamed of their relatives' or friends' sex work to quickly file a missing person report. The sex workers alerted us. Some of them, in private conversations with the police, said that the same man often used the services of the missing colleagues. He looked about 40-45 years old, tall, hair blogger, blonde, athletic build. Those who took orders from him never returned to work again. And basically, no one ever saw them again. The suspect appeared at the police station quite quickly. At the start of the investigation, law enforcement checked who previously owned the land where the human remains were found. The records clearly stated Alexander Romanovich Korniv, born in 1959. In 2004, he was 45. He was blonde, too. Not all coincidences are accidental. Well, considering Korniv's criminal past, he spent several years in prison for extortion and theft, you could basically forget about coincidences altogether. So Korniv was declared wanted, but they had to chase the suspect around a bit, just a little. He was no longer in Chernivtsi. After interviewing his acquaintances, investigators gained valuable information. Korniv had been dreaming of living near the sea for years. He spent a long time choosing a location and eventually settled on a small house in the Odessa region, right on the bay. Some sources say that he even managed to buy a home for himself there. With the money from selling his house in Chernivtsi, but other sources say that he only made a down payment and didn't manage to buy anything. One way or another, the trail now led directly to the bay, and soon that trail came to an end. No, Korniv really did go to the bay not long ago, but the task force didn't manage to catch him there. He escaped right under their noses. Again, some say he supposedly sensed danger, like an animal, and ran away, but others say he was warned. Someone, nobody knows who, maybe he had acquaintances in the police, but soon enough they did put handcuffs on him, in Chernivtsi. When he found out he was being followed, Korniv panicked and, under pressure, made a mistake. He returned to Chernivtsi, where an ambush was already waiting for him. In questioning, the man didn't truly deny his actions. Although it's hard to deny anything when there are 4 bodies buried on a plot of land you own. In the end, the man not only admitted that he had personally taken the lives of those 4 women, but also claimed that he was responsible for the deaths of 20 more. However, their bodies were never found, though Korniv said the search should have focused on the Carpathians.
I had another house in the Carpathians. I took girls there too. I remember I brought one there. But she decided to run away. Seems like she sensed something. I caught up with her, shaved her head, and forced her to dig her own grave. I killed her, threw her into that pit, and covered her with earth. I realized that now I didn't have to bother digging graves for them myself. The others, so they wouldn't get scared, would dig what looked like wells in advance. I told them there was no water, so if they wanted to drink, they had to dig. And they dug, not knowing that these were their future graves.
Korniv killed, as he himself stated, for 2 years. Why he chose this path we can only guess. He didn't appear to have any specific hatred toward women. Often maniacs start hunting women because they were traumatized by their mother or, for example, a lover. But that's not true for Korniv. For him it was the opposite. Probably only his mother truly loved him. She tried to give her son everything she could and forgave any mistakes or unworthy actions. Korniv's father left her and their son when Korniv was just a child, and this affected the number of working hours in the woman's schedule and the family's financial situation overall. As a teenager, Korniv felt his mother's money wasn't enough, so he decided to earn some extra money, but in a rather original way. One day, young Korniv found out about a place where men who held not the lowest positions at their workplaces would take their female subordinates to, let's say, have an entertaining time. I'm not sure how Korniv discovered this place, but everything I'll share comes directly from his statements to journalists. So, the place Korniv mentioned is a small grove. Although they wanted privacy, they would drive there and have fun inside their cars. Korniv, who was 15 at the time, waited in ambush. He figured out that cars most often appeared around lunchtime.
And as soon as things started getting lively in the car, I would come out of the bushes, walk up to the window and ask, "Are you having sex, comrade?" You should have seen those frightened faces. I demanded money from the guy. My rate was the same for everyone, 500 rubles. For comparison, my mother, who worked at a factory at that time, earned 150 rubles a month. Thank you.
If Korniv's victim refused to pay, there were several possible outcomes. The teenager threatened to tell the womanizer's wife about the spicy encounter, or he promised to report it at work. Such behavior in the mid-1970s could have been very costly. There was another option: hold a knife to the womanizer's companion's throat. To make a stronger impression, Korniv pressed the blade against the skin to draw blood and threatened to kill the woman. If the money isn't in his pocket right now, such actions worked even on those who weren't afraid of losing their family or their position. As an adult, Korniv, so to speak, tried to live like everyone else. He got a job at a factory as a welder. But the questionable prospects and low salary didn't please him much. So the man turned to crime, although from time to time he did work like everyone else.
He started committing robberies. In the evenings he attacked women. He would occasionally get a job. There was no choice. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, being unemployed meant prison.
Well, then there was another attempt to live like everyone else. Korniv got married, but family life also fell apart. As soon as one of the victims of the perpetrator recognized him sometime after the attack and reported it to the police. So Korniv was imprisoned, and his wife filed for divorce. When the man was released again, the Soviet Union was collapsing. And interestingly, Korniv made quite a profit from this. The authorities never found the goods he had stolen earlier. And that's a shame, by the way, because there was quite a lot of cash there. And diamonds too. So thanks to this, when he was free, the man started lending money at interest. With those who didn't return what they borrowed on time, the conversation was quite specific, with an iron, finger cutting, and other additional tortures. About 80 people were affected by the monster's actions, and only 12 turned to the relevant authorities with statements. For the second time, the criminal was locked up in the early 90s for 10 years. Well, what happened next after another stint in prison, you more or less already know. Korniv got out, wanted sex and a housemaid. So he paid 18-year-old Oksana and then buried his first victim. That very same Oksana.
I took the body to a private house and buried it in the shed. I threw away the head and burned the arms and legs in the stove. My cellmates are teasing me now, saying that I'm a cannibal. They claim I cooked and ate the flesh of those I killed. But that's not true, yes.
And for that we are grateful, as they say. But as you can see, Korniv didn't seem to have any reason to attack prostitutes and take their lives. There weren't any particular reasons for him to become some kind of vigilante either. Fortunately, the court was able to deliver a verdict even without understanding the root causes of the maniac's motivation. Korniv received a life sentence, spending about 5 years in solitary before moving to the general population. The maniac didn't cause any particular conflicts, and really that was no longer for him. You see, behind bars, Korniv found faith in God, and he started calling himself a Pentecostal. An old man serving time with him in the same cell converted him to this faith. That old man reportedly changed the murderer's mindset. The criminals began studying the Bible together, and Korniv also started painting. He especially enjoys maritime-themed works. After all, he didn't settle in the bay for nothing. Well, as you can see, even such a quiet and small place as Chernivtsi can, let's say in big hairy quotation marks, boast its own serial maniac. Unfortunately, not only with that. On October 3rd, 2022 shots were fired on the outskirts of Chernivtsi. Near the local school, bullets hit two people, a man and a woman. The attacker fled. The man with a gunshot wound was taken to the hospital. The woman was buried on October 6th. She was killed. Patrol officer Taisia Tatarin, 22, was shot. She arrived at school number 27 with her partner in response to a call. There, they noticed a man who seemed to have exposed his genitals before. Of course, no one had asked him to do that. The pervert was noticed by the children. They told the teachers, who then called the authorities. The arrest was not supposed to turn into a bloody horror movie. However, for some reason, the perpetrator turned out to be armed. And not just with that, with what he had in his pants, He killed Taisia with a shot to the head. On October 5, the attacker was detained by the police. However, he never made it to the courtroom. You see, the man was shot during the special operation, and he died. Some might call that karma if you believe in it. I don't. This story is very sad, and it once again reminds us of the injustice that sometimes appears here and there in life. But actually, I'd like to draw your attention to something else. The thing is, after the shooting, information appeared in the media about who the shooter was. It turned out to be the hitman Oleg Kryuchkovsky, a former employee of the Russian police. He allegedly came to Chernivtsi not alone, but with a partner, and specifically for the purpose of murder. Additionally, a local crime boss allegedly coordinated the criminal's activities, and the president of the Chernivtsi Boxing Federation, Volodymyr Zahurskyi. The media reported Kryuchkovsky lived in Zahurskyi's apartment. In that residence, law enforcement conducted a search and found not only weapons, but also information about the killer's future victims. Well, is it true or not? No. And the murder of the patrol officer, if you believe the rumors and various versions circulating online, was planned to destabilize the situation in the region. The killer's second intended victim was Chernivtsi businessman Vyacheslav Dobrovolsky. He was allegedly a competitor of that same Volodymyr Zahurskyi. If we assume that all of this is actually true, then it's logical to ask why Zahurskyi chose Kryuchkovsky for this, let's say, mission in the first place. Chernivtsi journalists found the answer to this question. Volodymyr Zahurskyi, his brother Mykola, whom we will return to later, and Kryuchkovsky studied at the same school as children. By the way, Kryuchkovsky's real last name is Onokov, but the men's paths later diverged. Zahurskyi settled, so to speak, in Chernivtsi, where he conducted his business, political, and allegedly even criminal activities. Well, as you might have guessed, Kryuchkovsky went to Russia, and he didn't just sit around there. Oh no. Several criminal cases were opened against him. The list of crimes includes armed robberies and murders. In 2014, Kryuchkovsky, also known as Onokov, was declared wanted. Well, he himself ran off, let's say, to hide in Chernivtsi. To some old acquaintances, actually, the Zahurskyi family. The trio never broke off contact and had maintained it since their youth. Moreover, we're not just talking about sending him a birthday greeting once a year on Viber. Onokov Kryuchkovsky had visited Chernivtsi several times. For example, he led shooting training for target security company fighters, owned by the Zahurskyi brothers. That's right, politics, the boxing federation, and now a security company. All this and more are the areas of activity and ownership of the Zahurskyi brothers. This last name is generally well known among Chernivtsi residents. It's linked to the creation and long-term operation of possibly the largest organized crime group, and the group in the region. The Zahurskyi brothers gathered a gang of tough guys in the 90s. It all started with just a couple of people, but over time their criminal organization grew to include dozens of members. At the height of their development, the team consisted of about 30 people, and that's just those who worked on a permanent basis. There was also a number of thugs who were brought into work periodically. For example, when they needed to intimidate with numbers, or when there were several tasks to be done at the same time. The organized crime groups of Zahurskyi specialized in debt collection, protection rackets, and extortion. There were cases of theft and selling stolen goods, for example, cars. By the way, a stolen car could later be returned to its owner, however, for a separate reward. That's the kind of business it was. And among the list of services, so to speak, there were also contract killings. Victims and relatives of victims rarely turned to law enforcement for help. Some were simply afraid, and others, if they survived, just disappeared without a trace. A typical 90s atmosphere in Ukraine. That's how it was. I remembered when they extorted money from me in Luhansk. Not thugs. but maybe I'll tell that story another time. Anyway, the problem was that even after this period ended, the organized crime group named Zahurskyi didn't cease to exist. However, it changed a bit, but I would say it changed for the worse. You see, its leadership, in order to maintain their influence, got involved in politics. Public sector's businesses with significant cash flows. That's exactly where they could hide evidence of their dirty dealings. And it was there, after Ukraine gained independence, that the biggest contracts were made and fierce competition took place. Mr. Mykola Zahurskyi later changed his last name to Mykola Klim. As far as I understand, he did this so that his connection to the criminal world, which he had in his youth, wouldn't be so obvious. If Mykola Zahurskyi was a shady businessman, Mykola Klim became a shady politician. He got involved with the Party of Regions, and from there, it wasn't far to Russia. Klim, if we believe the Chernivtsi journalists, established rather close ties with Russian criminal authorities. There is also plenty of information online about the involvement of the Zahurskys, both the elder and the younger, in the Russian influence network in Chernivtsi. It specifically means business merging with the criminal underworld. And with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, even back then, not without the help of Klim/Zahurskyi, websites started operating where publications and videos systematically appeared that discredited the Ukrainian authorities and, in general, pro-Ukrainian active citizens. Volodymyr Zahurskyi didn't stray far from his older brother. After the 90s, he became a businessman, officially, at least on paper. He was also involved in fuel trading, which is very profitable, in case you didn't know. But besides that, Zahurskyi Jr. is also said to be involved in shady dealings, like cigarette smuggling to Romania. It's rumored the fuel he sold wasn't obtained legally. Additionally, Volodymyr Zahurskyi became president of the Chernivtsi Regional Boxing Federation. Maybe someone can guess why he needed that. Since there hasn't been a trial, I can't state anything definitively. I'll refer to this as an assumption from now on. They say that it was from the halls of sports clubs, which are part of the Boxing Federation, that fighters were recruited into the Zahurskyi criminal group. After all, it's immediately clear there who is capable of what. Literally. In addition, if a guy is talented but doesn't have good financial support, the Federation can theoretically support the young talent. A little, let's say, with some hryvnias or rubles. However, the guy himself will have to pay for this with actions that are punishable under our law. The best part of all this, the cherry on top, is the Boxing Federation's funding. You see, the funds for the organization's activities are allocated from the city budget. So in fact, Chernivtsi, the residents themselves, are providing money so that bandits can be raised in the city, who will then threaten them. We live in a wonderful, strange world. In 2015, businessman Makita Luhovi was beaten in Chernivtsi. He was beaten so badly that the doctors couldn't save him. The man died in the hospital. 4 boxing club members were questioned as witnesses in this case. Although, according to some residents of Chernivtsi, it was those people who should have been held criminally responsible. After all, they allegedly killed the businessman. And another high-profile case attributed to the Zahurskyi group is the murder of a criminal authority figure. Nicknamed Pacha, he allegedly ran the drug trade in Chernivtsi. Well, and the Zahurskys supposedly didn't like that very much. As a result, Pacha was shot. Another criminal, this time from the Sumy region, was also said to be involved in that murder. But let's not get into all the possible theories and assumptions. After all, conflicts between criminals are nothing new. A mix of personal hatred, division of spheres of influence and profits. In 2021, Zahurskyi's group allegedly set fire to the Bukovina hotel head's car, who is a Chernivtsi city council member. By the way, I should mention him. He's truly extraordinary. I'd even say notorious because of some actions, but right now it's not about him. The deputy's car was reportedly set on fire after he chose to support the Zahurskyi family's rivals. Well, like in power and business. Besides that, Volodymyr Zahurskyi is linked to the case of the Chernivtsi pedophiles. This is about a case where 2 men organized something like a brothel where you could order intimate services. But with one nuance, the services were provided by those who were not yet of legal age. That's how it was. The media outlets that spread this information looked rather questionable in terms of their reputation. But it was noted that Zahurskyi helped the organizers of this business avoid responsibility. He even used their services himself. In short, Chernivtsi's streets still resembled 90s movie scenes until 2022 when things changed. Volodymyr Zahurskyi was declared wanted, and Ukrainian law enforcement announced the success of their special operation. They reported uncovering a criminal organization whose members were charged with serious crimes. Investigators found that the perpetrators threatened the victims' family members with physical violence in order to get money from them or take away their business. The criminals destroyed cars and houses and forced people to pay fake debts. For example, to force one of the victims to give up $6,000, they beat him and set his car on fire. Eventually, the man died. Every action was well planned. The bandits planned the attack scheme in advance, determined escape routes, and coordinated their actions in case of emergencies. These aren't just some petty thieves. The suspects who were apprehended had weapons and special equipment in their arsenal that allowed them to track potential victims. During the special operation, law enforcement officers seized 7 cars, $50,000, various weapons, ammunition, notebooks with rough notes, special equipment, and a whole lot of other items that were added to the case materials. Altogether, all of this was valued at 25 million hryvnias. If the suspects are proven guilty, they will face prison sentences of up to 20 years. By the way, the investigation materials mention only the crimes committed between 2015 and 2021, so those very suspects are the leader of the criminal group, a 49-year-old man from Chernivtsi, as stated in the police report, and his 4 subordinates. Law enforcement almost never mention names in official statements, but that doesn't mean no one has figured out who they're talking about. Most likely, they caught the Zahurskyi brothers and Stanislav Diadov, who was allegedly responsible for the killings, as well as other members of the gang. But as we know, exposing the crime doesn't necessarily mean putting someone behind bars. Volodymyr Zahurskyi has disappeared. The official documents state the date of his disappearance as August 18, 2023. No final punishment has been announced for the other high-profile figures. All that remains is to keep an eye on the situation and, let's say, keep our finger on the pulse. Also from the crime world, though not a violent case, there's a notable incident in Chernivtsi. After all, it tells about hundreds of victims who suffered from the actions of criminals. Here you have blocked city roads, rallies at city hall, court hearings, and ruined ordinary citizens' lives. You see, the story of the construction at 7 Rivnenska Street in Chernivtsi has been going on for 10 years now. Between 2016 and 2017, about 400 apartments in the Imperial Park Avenue complex were purchased from Imperial Boot. It sounds like construction work began. The first phase was to finish by 2019, allowing those who paid 800 million hryvnias to move into new apartments. That didn't happen. In 2018, the developer stopped working on the land plot. The official statement was financial difficulties. To continue the work, the company needed to invest another 3 million hryvnias. Supposedly, as soon as this money appears, the company will be able to hand over at least a few entrances for use. People paid the extra money, but they didn't get the promised housing. It got even worse. They didn't see any more builders at this location at all. It became clear that they needed to go to court. After all of this is the work of scammers. Soon it turned out that the construction of the apartment building had started without any permits to use the land plot. The developer simply didn't have the right to sell the apartments, but of course he was selling them anyway. However, the documents meant to confirm ownership of this housing were frankly highly questionable. No, some of the money was actually spent on construction just to, let's say, distract the attention of their victims. But they stole 280 million and spent it on their own needs. Chernivtsi residents kept going to court and demanded local authorities take action. After all, no construction work happens without the knowledge of officials. Here, the classic excuse kicked in, "It's not me and it's not my house." Who issued the permits to whom, on what grounds, under what conditions, and for what terms? Understanding this was at the very least not easy, not to mention finding the specific people responsible for the criminal scheme. It was only in February 2025 that the police announced they would finally bring to trial the head, founder, and financial director of the construction company. Cases related to real estate are considered by the courts extremely slowly. The results, as a rule, are unpredictable. And the people who suffered from the actions of the fraudsters are now forced to pay again. They have found a way out of the situation. They need to buy out the company that deceived them and finance the construction of housing again. Quote,
We used every influence on the developer. We went to Lviv with protests, appealed to the mayor of Chernivtsi and to law enforcement agencies. We had high hopes that the court would protect the rights of investors. but that did not happen.
We agreed with the tenants and new owners on the buyout price of corporate rights and have a notarized preliminary purchase agreement. For the completion of construction, people have to pay from $150 to $300. Not in total, but per square meter. Obviously, not everyone can afford that. However, this is the only way to finally get your dream home. Well, dear friends, that's how it is. See you in the next video. It will be very interesting. Thanks for watching. See you next time.